Joel, thank you. And Joel, I want to thank you, Denise, the whole SAMA team for helping us get this body of work to this place. You heard Denise this morning in her opening remarks talk about that this is the great unveiling of a SAMA-sponsored body of research. And I have to tell you, in my 40 years in the business, rarely, if ever, have I been more excited about something, a topic. And I think it's for two reasons. I think one is because it's validating something I've always known to be true. And secondly, it's something that's completely different than anything we've had in this industry. So let me open it up with a framing metaphor, and then I'm going to introduce my two partners. So here's the metaphor. Back in my 20s and 30s, I couldn't stand sushi. I used to go out with my friends to sushi restaurants, and I couldn't stand it. It was disgusting to watch them eat this raw fish. But then, I think it was around my mid-30s, I finally tasted good sushi. And now, suffice to say, I'm a sushi guy every week. So sushi became a new food group in my life. Well, we're going to introduce to you a new food group. We'll call it a new developmental food group for your life and for your career, and it's called character science. And it opens up with a provocative thesis. Here is the thesis. Who you are matters more than what you do. Let me say it one more time. Who you are matters more than what you do. That's not my opinion. That has been researched by my two colleagues and friends who are also on this session. So let me introduce the core researcher of that statement, Dr. Fred Keel. Fred is a dear friend, a writer, a thinker, an author, former CEO. He has been a mentor to me for much of my life. And Fred, thank you for being with us. What a delight and honor to have you on this.
Thrilled to be here.
Joining him, the CEO of KRW International, is Kelly Garamone. And Kelly and I have been working on this, and it's so much fun because Kelly is a research mind and I'm not. I'm a sales guy. So it's been a wonderful kind of marriage of mindsets here to bring this body of work to you. So what we're going to do is explain this new food group to you. Talk about why character matters and why it's not a soft issue. We're going to talk about the evolution of character science, and you'll see that there's been a lot of research to get us to this point. This is hard science for what you may think is a soft topic. We're going to talk about what Fred and Kelly and team have revealed as what we call the core four character habits, and how those character habits, and here's the real key, create value and create business and financial and sales outcomes. That's why we're here, is to show that correlation. And finally, maybe most importantly, to ask you to participate in this research. As Denise said, we are unveiling it today. Our goal is to do this body of work over the next year. And then in annual conference 2022, I believe it's in New Orleans, if Joel just reminded me, we will unveil this body of research, but we want you to be part of it, because I am passionate and we are passionate about nobilizing, professionalizing the industry of sales and SAM. And that's what this is about. In fact, maybe we can have a new lexicon here. We've talked a lot about customer centricity. This is about character centricity. So Fred introduced a beautiful kind of piece to me that was intriguing, because to understand how people see our character, we have to look at ourselves from the outside in. And I've always said, we can't read our own label when we're inside of our own jar. We have to get it from the outside. But yet, as this quote talks about, we spend so much of our lives avoiding looking at what David Brooks has called our moral ecology. And I love this last sentence, Fred. By middle life, most of us have become accomplished fugitives from ourselves. We've been really good at running away from looking at ourselves. Fred, why do we do that? Why are we so fearful of looking at ourselves from the outside in?
Well, it's a great mystery to me. I don't know. It's proven that when people do that, that they find all sorts of wonderful things and become more complete human beings, and life gets better. It feels so good to be who you really are. That's what you discover when you go internal and explore the internal world.
Well, and that's what Kelly will describe later, is the process by which we're going to have others look at us from the outside in so we can gain more knowledge about ourselves. And here's why that matters. Number one, probably the best framing metaphor I can think of is for all of us in our financial life. If you have a high credit score, there are natural rewards for having a better credit score. You get better interest rates, better loans, and there's a lot of benefits that come from that. In many ways, what we're going to be talking about is the credit score for your reputation. Your reputation is your brand. Your brand is your career. What can be more important than that? Number two, I believe in a post-COVID world, we're no longer selling solutions. You are the solution. And your personal ability to bring what I call credible clarity to your customers has never mattered more. Credible is about trustable and believable. Third, and we're going to show this in our research, is we believe character habits will accelerate customer engagement and customer commitment and company commitment. So again, we're not doing this to be nice. We're doing this because it is a distinguisher and drives business outcomes. And based on the research that Fred and Kelly and KRW have done, there is an observable and consistent relationship between character and outcomes. And here's the good news. It's learnable. We can learn the habits of strong leaders and unlearn the habits of poor character. So the good news is, yes, it can be built. Your moral muscles can be developed, but the ultimate value prop is what Fred just said. It just allows you to feel good about who you are. And I think too much of our industry, we've been trying to create human doings, not human beings. And I think this is a radical and timely shift now to start to talk about, again, our moral ecology. So, Fred, I'm going to turn it over to you because we said it took a long time to get here and a lot of research, and kind of give us the background of what brought us to this point, Fred.
Well, I've been in this game for at least 40 years. I got my doctorate from the University of Minnesota in counseling psychology in 1971, and shortly thereafter opened a private practice in the Minneapolis St. Paul market. I wasn't in that very long before one of the senior executives of a local Fortune 500 company had been in for some family counseling. And a few months after that, he started sending me his other senior people that reported to him. And I was very much the medical model at that time. And I, you know, when people came in, I tried to diagnose a mental, emotional, or behavioral disorder. And these people that he was sending to me weren't diagnosable. I mean, they were probably difficult people to be with and rather abrasive and perfectionistic, but they weren't diagnosable. So after about the third one, I called him up. I said, Norb, I really appreciate you trying to build my practice, but I said, these guys you're sending me aren't diagnosable. And I'll never forget what he said, because he said, the hell they aren't. He said, I'll diagnose them. He said, they're a pain in the ass. then he went on to talk about the fact that nobody would work with him. And while it's technically the best talent that he could find in the world and paying high price for it, he couldn't get access to the talent. And then he said to me something I also won't forget, is he said, you're a bright young psychologist, figure out something. And he wouldn't let me off the hook. and that launched my career into working with senior executives on their development. And at that time, there was hardly anything in the literature. There was one article that had been published by the Harvard Business Review, and that was 1979. It was called The Abrasive Executive. But other than that, there was no literature at all on senior executives and their development needs, because it was assumed that the reason that they're in senior positions is because they have been developed already. They don't need to develop any further. Well, once that balloon was popped, then we began to devise methodology and ways of working with senior executives on their development, and that became known as executive coaching. We were very much involved in this whole business long before the metaphor executive coach came about. In fact, that came about, we think the first time in the business press was in 1993, when Fortune magazine did a cover story on our work called The Executive's New Coach. And that's when I think that metaphor came about. But we really focused and acquired many Fortune 500 companies working with their senior executives on their development needs. And we combined academic research along with it. We published an article in a consulting psychology journal called Coaching at the Top. And that led then to two very successful books that I co-authored with another person. And then those books have done very well. They're in 7 or 8 different languages. They're very successful. That then led me to decide to look at I puzzled by the fact that it seemed to me that the senior people who were the most successful were also the ones that everybody admired for their character. And so that then led to a research project that culminated in 2015 with the publication of the book called The Return on Character. We recruited over 100 CEOs in their organizations and surveyed random samples of over 8,500 of their employees to give us feedback on how they rated the way in which those senior executives treated them. And it turned out that from that, we were able then to identify a core group of senior leaders that all the employees just raved about how great they were and how much they loved to work at their organizations. And we contrasted that with the bottom of the 84 CEOs we had in our study. And then we just looked at the financial results. We compared the return on assets for the 2 previous years for the 2 groups, and we were amazed at what we found. We found that high character is more than icing on the cake. It really matters. It brings in nearly 5 times greater returns to the bottom line than the low character. Those are rated as low character by their employees. And of course, greater workforce engagement too, 26% higher. And they're lower level of corporate risk. There are fewer lawsuits against the companies of the high character leaders. So, it's not 5%, that's 500%. So it's a dramatic change. What we found is that we were now confronting a long-term belief in the business world. Everybody agrees in the business world that poor character can destroy value and destroy results. But there was the accepted belief was that high character is nice to have, but it's not really very important as long as you stay legal and you don't engage in the bad behavior. And what we discovered is that it's not just icing on the cake. In fact, we have compelling evidence to show that it is a significant driver that creates value. It's far more important than what the business schools teach leaders on their business skills. So that is kind of where we are today. And we're now wanting to move into seeing if this relationship holds for sales and sales success as well.
And that's, Fred, where I was, the epiphany I had when I read your book was that, everybody on this session, we all know that being a good person makes you better. But what
Mhm.
you've now proven, and this to me was the epiphany, that it is not just being a good person, it's makes you
Right.
a good business person.
Yep.
And also, I was just also drawn to your work because I want to be a better person. I look at myself and I have a lot of inner work to do. And you gave me kind of a taxonomy in which to do that and get feedback. Kelly,
Mhm.
you had a great story you told me many weeks ago about a senior executive that got feedback in another way.
Oh, right.
Tell us that one for just a minute.
Yeah. Oh, this is a classic one. And this is what we will try to help you avoid. Let's put it that way. So he was a very senior executive at this point of a global financial services organization and in you know account development. And so he came to talk to our group that we were working with, top 300 people. And so this was his story of encouragement to everybody to take on this program and to do, to embrace feedback. So he said when he was earlier in his career, he had been very successful as being an account executive, and so much so that he was promoted quite quickly and was asked to actually kind of go around the world and all their global offices and sort of teach everybody what he did, as you called it, Phil, sort of, kind of spread the pixie dust around the world. And he was young enough and kind of gung-ho enough that he just thought, all right, that's what you want, I'll go do that. And, I've got this figured out, I'll go evangelize around the world. So he got himself on this literally around the world tour to go from office to office. And word started to spread that he was coming and kind of what he was about, what he was offering and everything. And he knew that and sort of enjoyed the additional attention. So he was at this one office and had just finished this really intense day and looked at his watch and thought, oh, the car's waiting for me to take me to the airport. Gotta go. So he grabbed his stuff, ran out to the elevator and realized just as he crossed the threshold of the door that he'd forgotten his phone. So he quickly pivoted back to get his phone and did it so quickly that it surprised the whole office because they were all standing there going to him as he was leaving. And he went this and thought, and of course, as he's telling the story, he says to everyone, you want to talk about feedback? Now that's feedback. But he still had to walk into the room and get his phone and then walk all the way back to the, to the elevator. But he said in talking about it, that was like the best day and the worst day of his career. He said it was the longest airplane ride he'd ever had, but he used that time to really think. And then he also talked to a few trusted people to get feedback from them and realized he kind of had sort of believed his own headlines at this point, rather than treating his colleagues and everyone in the organization as partners and even as well as he would have treated his customers. He just got all in his own head and thought that this is what needed to be done. And so the story is important for two reasons. One is that we are, the feedback people basically, and we want to make sure that people don't have to get to that point of getting feedback that way, because that's just particularly painful and not fun. But the other is that we also know him and came to know him well enough to know that what he was doing was actually well intended. And he had good intent about what he was doing and thought he was doing what people were asking him for. He just kind of got lost a bit in the way. And once he found his way back to really be living within his sort of values and his intent, then it all really turned around and went very well. And it was good for him.
And Kelly, I think that's the word, as I've learned from both of you, and maybe it gets back to that original question, why we're so afraid of looking at ourselves sometimes, is that it can be shameful. It can be shaming. But what you've taught me, and tell me if I'm getting this right, is character is not about our intentions. We all get out of bed in the morning intending to be good and decent people. I mean, nobody gets out of bed wanting to be a jerk.
Right.
But it's not that. It's not our intentions. It's how others perceive our behaviors. Is that roughly right, Kelly?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely right.
And that for me was the great de-shamifier, is of course my intentions are good, but my behaviors always don't match that. Now, why does this matter? I want to go back just a couple hours ago. I thought Tiffany Bova did a beautiful keynote over I think it was over the lunch hour, or at least it was here in Minneapolis. And I'm going to quote her on a couple of things. She said, growth is a thinking game, business growth. What we're talking about today is not the thinking, but the thinker and the character of the thinker, which is you and us. And then she went on to say, customers remember the experience that they had with a person much longer than the price that they paid. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets back to that the way in which now we show up, impact others, and occupy our space is ultimately the value that we bring, which is why, again, this character science isn't soft stuff.
Right.
So here's the big reveal. Kelly, Fred, walk us through, as I like to call these, the core four. After all of your research, how did you get to these four and why do they matter?
Well, I'll just answer the big question, how we got to them. When we launched into doing this research, we did thorough literature review. We went back and reviewed the writing of ancient Greek philosophers and up through the centuries of all of the great thinkers in the world about human development and morality, and then into the psychological literature on child development and how people learn to be good human beings and all of that. And then we discovered the field of cultural anthropology. And it turns out that the cultural anthropologists had turned their attention in the last couple of decades of the 20th century to studying what it is that human societies have in common all over the world. And they discovered this amazing list that they published in a book called Human Universals in 1998 or 99. And in that book, they discovered that parents all over the world teach their children these four areas. They teach them to tell the truth, to keep their promises. They teach them to be responsible, take responsibility for their personal choices. They teach them also, that's two of the head, and then they teach them two of the heart. They teach them to be forgiving and kind and caring and compassionate, at least to their family group or to their clan. And once we realize that these are universals, they must be built into our DNA. And we then consulted the neuroscience literature, and we found out that, in fact, the new and the latest view of human nature is that humans are born with this innate desire to be kind and good and compassionate, cooperative, and to be truth tellers. Now, it's true that people can deviate from that when they're feeling threatened, and of course that leads to wars and all kinds of things. But in general, the human race is called the great cooperative race on the species. We are the great cooperators. And so anyway, with that as a foundation, we then reasoned that how important, which of the things, the principles are most important in leadership. And we arrived at these two of the head: integrity, responsibility, and forgiveness and compassion. And then our research focused on measuring those, figuring out ways to measure those.
So again, these were the four that correlated directly to those business outcomes you talked about a few minutes ago. Is that right, Fred?
That's exactly right. What we found was that the leaders who scored their employees rated their behavior as being highly reflective of integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion, that those leaders and their senior teams are the ones that brought in this amazing 5 times more to the bottom line than the leaders and their teams who were not viewed that way. Now, it's important, there's some big differences. These generally, both groups were viewed as being high on integrity, but that wasn't enough. It was the ones that were high on integrity as well as having the dimensions of the heart that brought in the great value.
I remember, Kelly, when we first met, I shared with you when I first read this, the one that of the four that maybe surprised me, for lack of a better word, was forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't expect that one.
Yeah.
How does that fit in this architecture, and why does forgiveness matter in business?
Yeah, that surprised us too, and honestly, we were kind of looking to get rid of it because we thought it was going to be the thing that we were going to get the most guff about. And you know, it's simpler to have like 3 things to remember rather than 4.
Hmm.
But what's really interesting is, as Fred says, those really high returns are only present when there's a balance of all 4 of these. Even if you just take out forgiveness, the whole thing falls apart because forgiveness by itself, you even see it has the fewest bullets. It has the fewest specific behaviors that made the cut, but it seems to be the difference that makes the difference in the quality of overall leadership.
Hmm.
And part of that is that we see that there's a very specific definition of forgiveness. It's not, as some people sort of fear, like, oh, anything goes and you're a pushover. It's not that at all. Virtuoso leaders, who are these high character leaders leading high character teams, are tough business people, and but they have this heart edge to them, or heart side to them, that takes off the edge. So here's the definition of forgiveness that is so value producing. It's in 2 parts. First, you forgive if someone has made a mistake that is well-intended, it's in service of your goals, and it's within the risk profile of your organization. If
Hmm.
they make a mistake or have a failure under those conditions, you forgive immediately. However, you don't forget. Now that's an opportunity to develop somebody, to help them, to coach them, to help them to really learn from that mistake. Once they've demonstrated that they've learned from the mistake, not just say, yeah, yeah, I got it, but like they behave differently, so they've demonstrated they've learned from it, then those virtuoso leaders let it go. And
Hmm.
what's important about that is that mistake doesn't haunt them or become part of their, like a black mark on their reputation. And
Mhm.
so as a result, they then know how to take risk better. So they become innovators. They become more willing collaborators because they're not so fearful of the consequences of what might go wrong. And that's part of what creates those value creating conditions, is that if you have a lot of people who feel free to be that way, you have a more productive organization.
Fred, a lot of this sounds a little bit like EQ. You know, I've been through Myers-Briggs and all the instruments
Mhm.
over the years. How is this different?
That's a very good question, because people are apt to think that this is another view of personality,
Mm.
and it's not. And since you brought up Myers-Briggs, I'll use that as an example. I think I once asked you, Phil, if you knew what your Myers-Briggs type was, and you told me what it was, and then yeah, that's how I experience you. And then I asked you, how many people are sitting behind bars today that have your same personality, Myers-Briggs type? And you laughed, and you realized there are probably a lot of them. Well, I don't think there's hardly any, probably none, that are sitting behind bars that they are rated by a random sample of a lot of people that know them as being high in integrity, responsibility, and forgiveness and compassion.
Mm.
These are reflections of your inner character, of your intent, and they're not personality. You can have a very introverted person that demonstrates these, and a very extroverted person that demonstrates these. These are the variables that you use when you decide whether or not you're going to trust someone, and how you judge their character, which we all do. We meet somebody new and we make snap judgments about their character in the first 5 minutes of meeting them. And as time goes on, if they demonstrate these 4 characteristics, we just think they're wonderful people. We think they're highly principled. Doesn't matter what their personality type is. Now, generally, high character people are also emotionally intelligent, but not all of them are great in emotional intelligence. I mean, I know of examples of highly introverted leaders who were rated very high on all of these, but were pretty limited with regard to their EQ skills. So it's
Mhm.
different.
So to me, in many ways, we talk about, especially in SAM, the need for what I describe business empathy. Does that correlate to these in some ways? Is people who aren't self-focused?
Well, sure. Being able to empathize with others is a core EQ skill, but it's also a very good skill to serves you well when you're dealing with people in general.
Now, Fred and Kelly, when I read your book, you took business leaders, CEO level leaders, you plotted them on a curve in essence. The top quartile, you called them virtuoso leaders. The bottom were, I think you called self-focused, narcissists, for lack of a better term, correct? And
No, they
no,
weren't narcissists.
tell me the difference there, Fred.
Well, narcissists are people that are very challenged with regard to their ability to empathize with other people. And the people at the bottom of our curve were not that way. They were people of good intention. They thought they were as honorable as the people at the top of the curve, just that they did not demonstrate it effectively in their behavior, and they were unaware of that. And when they discovered that, when we gave them the results, they were shocked and horrified. They didn't want to be that way. So they were not narcissists at all.
So there was no outage of intention. It was, again, the
Right.
behaviors, as we talked about earlier, that was the delta in that equation. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Kelly, give us a sneak preview. We're going to talk a little bit later. And again, we're inviting everybody to participate in this research. And I've gone through it myself. And I say to those people on this call, this has been one of the most nutritious and impactful things that I have been through, because you're getting feedback from the various, shall we call them, concentric rings of your relational network. And one of the things I found interesting is you get some of your best and most accurate feedback from those farther away from you.
Right.
So Kelly, unpack a little bit, give us a sneak preview of what the 360 looks like, and then why is it that farther away produces clear input, if you would?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that. For the very simple reason that people farther away from you only know you by your reputation. And what we found in our research, and we continue to find, and as we work with organizations, is that that's the only kind of, as you said earlier, that's the only credit score that matters. The organization will interact with you and either run through walls for you or run away from you based on your reputation. Doesn't matter what your intent is if your intent is not accessible to them. So for instance, we will see clients that have a very strong positive intent but have their reputation be quite low among people that are like the direct reports of their direct reports, but their direct reports will say, well, I know she doesn't mean to, but, and I know that she's really busy, and if it weren't for being so busy, she would do this instead. So they give you all the kind of leeway and kind of pre-make excuses for you, whereas all the rest of the organization doesn't, because they don't know your intent. So they just were like, well, if that's the way he is, that's if that's what he's given, that's what he's getting. And so that's what we've got to do is be able to join that. So one of the first times that we did this for an entire senior team, so for really interesting global organization, and we were in the conference room at the headquarters, like in one of those rooms where Picasso's on the walls that have never seen museums. It's like to that. And we had the task of showing them their credit score, their reputation score, and they had an absolute virtuoso self-assessment in the top 10, and their global employee group put them below the bottom of our database. And so when we presented this to them, there was this shocked, dead silence. Like, these people were not used to being told they were anything but best in class. And so I just let it sit for a moment. And then I said, guys, this is great news. And they look at me and they're like, yeah, smiley face American, how are you going to make a good spin out of this? And I said, no, truly, we don't have to teach you what the right thing is to do. You've already got that. Now we got to find out why people aren't seeing you that way. Once they can see who you really are and the way you behave behind closed doors, whoosh, that's going to just match your reputation, will match your intent, and look at all this latent value you'll be able to catch. And they then were like, cool, let's get started. What do we do? And so I think that's part of what I know resonates so well with you, Phil, is we've really learned through this research, core character habit is to have compassion. We have deep compassion for people who are willing to do this work. And it comes from a foundation of knowing that almost everybody we've met has positive intent. We just are trying to figure out, we're kind of the detectives to help you figure out what's being misunderstood, or what's the mismatch between what you're doing and what you mean to do. And when we can match that up, everybody wins.
Kelly, you've also talked about why the 4 in a composite mode matter. It's not just 2 out of the 4.
Yeah, so my joke is, if you just have, strong head habits of integrity and responsibility, you're probably a drill sergeant. And if you just have strong heart habits of forgiveness and compassion, you're my grandmother.
Mhm.
So it's not one or the other. It's this uncommon blend when you put it together, where you're tough, but you're also supportive when you know when and how to be. That it's that combination that creates the conditions in your organization that just allows people to flourish and to take the right kind of risks and to just deliver the hell out of what you ask them to do.
So now let's go back, Kelly, and let's unpack that statement that I opened up with that came from you, not me, of who you are matters more than what you do.
Yeah, so the
Unpack that.
Sure. Yeah, the evidence behind this is really stark. As Fred said, once we had all of this data, we just methodically compared one variable against outcomes, and then another variable against outcomes. So that's how we were able to narrow it down. So we tested about 300 behaviors and got it down to the 27 that really matter. So we also then thought, well, we can't just believe our own hypothesis that it's about who you are. Maybe it's also that people that got these results were just far more skilled. So we looked at the skills alone against the results, and that actually didn't show the same kind of correlation. So what we started out by thinking is that there was some combination of who you are in terms of your character habits plus the level of your skills, that combination was kind of equal balance that would create the results. But actually, once we looked at the results, we saw it's much more of this kind of a thing, almost an exponential relationship. And so the implications of this for all of us are, if you only have 1 hour, $1, 1 moment to spend on your development, spend it on your character habits, because those will magnify your skills. And our understanding of that is that basically your character habits either become an invitation to others to come and work with you more and to learn more about you and to access your skills, or they become a barrier to your skills. So that's why it's more beneficial to really focus on your character habits, because you get that sort of twofer effect where your skills come along with it.
Well, this image also, in my doctorate work, I've learned about horizontal development versus vertical. And horizontal, I've looked at myself for decades, as we all do, running around looking for the next nugget of knowledge, right? The next white paper, the next website, the next TED Talk, the next podcast. And ultimately that just becomes exhausting.
Right.
This is a new archetype talking about vertical development, in essence, curating your depth, not your width, if you will, in life. And kind of first principle living, as I describe it. So we're going to take this algorithm now. We're going to take everything that Fred and Kelly have spent much of their life researching, that Harvard has published around this correlation between character habits. And so we're now going to bring it in the world of Sam and sales. So let's start with the value chain that you folks have revealed, and then the one that we're going to bring to Sama and to Sam.
Sure. So I'll just take a moment to lay this out. And actually, it's kind of funny. This came about because our Harvard editors said, love the data, love the outcomes, love the story, but you got to put it on one page and make it really clear to us, frankly, how does character turn into money? Just say it out. So that's what this is here to show. And really what it's saying is that your character is who you are, that first box, and that's a combination of your personality and your life experiences that really form your habits around, do you automatically tell the truth when needed? Do you automatically take responsibility for your own actions, etc.? What are your automatic sort of habitual responses in those 4 character habits? And you'll see there that we've noted looking at your intent versus your reputation. So that's here very clearly as well. But how does that become evident to other people is what we're showing here then, of how that begins to move out of who you are into what you do and reflected in your skills. And the easiest way to begin to see someone's character in action is through the decisions they make. And they will make either operational decisions or people decisions. And again, you know, are they making decisions by really treating people fully as people and listening to their concerns and their needs before making the decision? Are they, you know, are they telling them the truth in order to be able to get the best information from them, et cetera? So the skills here are, for our original purposes, were what general leadership needed in order to run an organization. So you can see vision and strategy, accountability, team leadership, those sorts of things that the character of the leader and the character of the leadership team create these conditions then with this combination of their skills that then result in some level of workforce engagement and execution readiness. And Phil's being a little bit modest here. And ultimately they come up with all that turns into the return on your character. And Phil is the one who coined that phrase for us. I just want to do a little call out to you there, Phil.
I'm a sales guy.
Yeah, so that's what general leadership looks like. So now our question is, what would be the same or different for SAMs? And Phil's, I think you're better suited to discuss that.
So we're going to start at the same starting point, which is the researched habits that we've articulated on the left. And now we're going to infuse those into what we call the 4 sales mindsets of the future. And these are mindsets that have been developed by my friend and partner and our business partner, Consalia, out of London, Dr. Phil Squire. He's just written a beautiful book, which is sitting right next to me, called Selling Transformed, and just one of the most beautiful pieces I've seen that really articulates the archetype of what strategic selling and SAM is going to look like in the future. And in a nutshell, he has codified the 4 mindsets for the future: authenticity, tactful audacity, proactive creativity, and customer centricity. And there he's also identified all of the corollary sales behaviors. So what are we going to do? We're going to take and intersect Fred's 4 core character habits with these 4 mindsets. And from that, through research that we want you to be part of, birth what we will call the Keystone sales behaviors. Keystone as in high correlation, high return behaviors. Which behaviors create the highest output? Back to what creates the money, as Kelly just said. Now, we're starting with the thesis of 3 core, we'll call them metametrics. As I said earlier, customer engagement, company and customer commitment, and ultimately financial sales results. That's why we're here, is to show this correlation. So this is the grand intersection that you can participate in. And the value prop for you is twofold. One is to gain some great insight from the outside about you and where to focus. And secondly, help elevate our entire industry and do this in the SAMA community. But this is the picture of the thesis, if you will, that we're inviting you to be part of. Kelly, did I miss anything? You're the grand researcher. Did I miss any kind of research points on that picture?
No, I don't think so, other than, you know, again, this is research, so we have a hypothesis, and our hypothesis is that we are expecting that we may find that people who have both these strong character habits and who actively practice these 4 mindsets will have the highest levels of engagement, commitment, and financial results. But we don't know. I mean, that's the beauty of research, is that we will be asking a lot of questions and see what the answers reveal.
And here is the ask, and it's a passionate ask. And here's the good news. You can do it for free if you want. So we're offering kind of two levels, two dosages that you get to choose to be part of this research community, as we just talked about. The first is what we call the core sites level, which is the free level. And then for those of you who want to do a much deeper dive, gain much more, I would call precise information, coaching, feedback, you can choose to do the deeper dive, which is what we call insight. So Kelly, again, you're the researcher. Walk us through kind of how these work and what's in it for people on which dosage they choose.
Okay. So core sites is as Phil says, is the core. So anyone participating in our research does the core sites level. If you also choose to go on to do insights, it builds off, it's additive. So that's where the plus sign comes in. So again, keep in mind, this is research. So we will be gathering a lot of data about you. And again, remember that whole idea of reputation and needing to go farther out. So it's a multi-rater kind of a data gathering where you'll need to ask people from around your system to participate and give you feedback. What we'll do is we'll be able to give you feedback pretty quickly based on our current database about general leadership. So as a result, there will be two versions of your report we will give you. Right away, once we get the data, we will be able to give you what we're calling report 1, which is your leadership report. And that's normed and benchmarked against our database currently. But once all of the SAM data are in, and so SAMA and also corporate sponsors and others are participating in this, once we have a global sales leadership database, we'll rerun your data to re-benchmark it and give you additional insights against that now new research base. So on core sites, what you'll receive is your leadership report fairly early on, and then probably sometime after the first of the year and next spring when we have the data, you'll receive your SAM version of your report. In between that, we'll ask you to do a few follow-ups that you can just do through email or through a portal that we have to do some sort of ongoing checking in with you about what you've learned. And as Phil says, that's free. If you'd like to have more insights around the implications of both your leadership report and then your SAM report, we're offering this insights package that you can add on top of your core sites, where you'll get a bit more of the color from the data, some open-ended comments, so you can begin to get some voices in the room and understand, some from people giving you examples of why they see you the way they do. And we'll also have 2 workshops where you can come and join a group, start with a cohort, to have some support and guidance around how to interpret and how to make use of and sense of these reports, so that you can, if you choose, you can then use them for your own personal development, and hopefully then, harness some of the latent value that maybe you're leaving on the table with the gap between your intent and your reputation.
Kelly, tell us more. I use that word Keystone. So as I said earlier, I have been going through this. In fact, I think it was Friday, Kelly had a session with me where we stratified down to the one Keystone habit that I want to focus on that'll bring me the highest return. So one more time, decode the word Keystone so we get that one, Kelly.
I'd be happy to. So, you can tell we're passionate researchers. Fred is, always doing the literature review. So what I'm about to tell you doesn't come from us. This is from other fields, but we then take what other fields have learned and have brought it in here. So the term keystone actually comes from biology, where biologists noticed in certain ecosystems that if you were to remove one species or 1 or 2 species from the ecosystem, the entire ecosystem would fall apart. And so they would say that those were the keystone species that held it all together. Well, neurosciences looked at that kind of concept and said, actually, we're also noticing that if you look at human behavior, especially habitual behavior, there are some habits that when someone's practicing them regularly are so powerful, they pull other habits along with them without the person even trying. Great example is if you are someone who exercises regularly, while you're practicing your regimen, you would expect you're also going to eat better, probably sleep better, feel better. You expect those things, but there's research that shows that not only do you get those benefits, but you also spend money more responsibly. You also resolve conflict more productively, which you wouldn't expect just from your morning run. You'd get better money management. So that's what makes your exercise routine what's known as a keystone habit. Well, the great news is we now have so much data around character behaviors and their relationship to outcomes. We can, once we gather the data about you, give you a choice of your top behaviors, where if you were to focus on one of them, it would become your keystone. So that's really what we're here to help everybody find, is what's your personal keystone that will then unlock your latent value.
And that's what attracted me, because I often get just learning and development fatigue. I can't learn 19 things. But the beauty is when you stratify it down to this one, it becomes extremely energizing. So here's just a quick kind of wine sampler for the insights level, Kelly, of an elevation plan, yes?
Yes, and we call it an elevation plan because what we want to do is elevate your reputation up that character curve to join your positive intent. So this is a sample of a fellow who, this is the end result of what he then is using as his personal development plan. On the left side in gray, you see that what we ask people to do and help you to do is, in a nutshell, describe the current state of your reputation. What does your label on the outside of your jar say right now? And in this case, this particular fellow saw himself as being, and was also seen as being, highly innovative, creative, willing to take risks. His mindsets were around client centricity and proactive creativity, but he was also a real lone wolf and quite volatile and just avoided feedback and criticism. So as a result, he was not really chosen very often. People didn't want to work with him on client teams, and he had, I don't know how many of your groups use net promoter scores, but he had a low net promoter score. So once he understood that, he was kind of sort of stunned by being seen that way. We asked him to think, what would your desired reputation be? And so he wanted to hold on to that creativity and that risk taking. And the image that he had of it is of landing on the moon or on Mars, because he said no one gets to the moon on their own without a team. In fact, you can't even stay there without a team. I want to be the guy who's known as the most creative, futuristic problem solver here. I want people to fight to be on my team rather than to avoid me. And so with that vision in mind, then because we care about metrics, we asked him then to think about how will he know he's living that way. So he's got his desired impact with metrics. But what we could do then is take all of his data and help him to focus down out of all these behaviors, all this feedback he got, what's that one thing he could start doing that would get him to that desired outcome? And it was this one behavior item, which is caring about people as people, not as sort of the human capital that he needed to produce results. And once he heard that, he thought, oh, maybe if I treat my team like I treat my clients, would that be a good way to start? And of course, that's the key. That was what needed to begin his ball rolling. So anyway, then we help him to really make that tangible, have a new plan, his own kind of habit loop, and also what sort of support he can ask for in the system to help him achieve that.
And again, in the insights level comes the coaching and the feedback and the explanation behind this. But this is just one of the, shall we say, the tools. Also, and again, we won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but we wanted to let you know that we'll be doing groups. And I think, Kelly, you're shooting for, if companies have groups of roughly 8 or more, we'll look at customized packages, probably one of the most accretive things you can do as a team. And Kelly, allay any concerns of people's sense of, if they do this as a team, the proprietary information, I mean, just so people don't get concerned about that.
Oh gosh, everything we do is predicated on absolute confidentiality. We used to say we were the Swiss bank of confidentiality, but that doesn't have such a good ring to it anymore. So I have to come up with something else. But yeah, we live and die by confidentiality and anonymity. In fact, your personal information, like your actual name and company and everything, will be removed from all of the data quite quickly, put on a separate list and in a locked place. until all the data are assembled and we do our analysis and we publish, then we'll destroy that list so it will forever break the connection between your identity and your data. And what we're offering here to corporate groups isn't that we will give your organization a report about you and reveal what we learned about you to them. What we're saying is that we will only share to corporate sponsors a summary or anything as a collective view of trends that we see or of opportunities, so that we still maintain the confidentiality and privacy of all of the individual participants.
I simply can't think, though, of a more timely investment as we all come back into the new world. We come out of our caves back into the real world again, to using science, using research now, really curate how we show up to others for the rest of our career as we come out. It couldn't be at a better time, I don't believe. And so how do we do this? In closing, here's kind of the wrap up here of what we've talked about. Let's go back to the beginning. Who you are matters more than what you do. We've now shown you the research behind that statement. We want to bring the validated research that Fred and his team have done for leaders that show this correlation to business outcomes. And we now want to bring it into the world of sales and to SAM. And we're doing this under the petri dish of SAMA. Because as I said, this is about reputation management. It's the credit score for your reputation, which elevates engagement, commitment, but most importantly, as Kelly said, it's about the money and creates the financial results. And then going back to what Kelly said, the benefit, one of the many you get, is to learn those keystone character habits for you that have the most efficacy on this flywheel. Is that a rational summary, Fred and Kelly, or did I miss any bullet points?
You didn't miss any bullet points, but I'd like to cycle back to the beginning of the session when we talked about the fearful, frightful world within. Most of us are fugitives from ourselves. Well, we provide you a way of looking at that world that is safe and is not frightening. We start with the premise that you are a good person, that you have great intentions, that you, because that's what our research has shown, and all of the ones in our research were stunned when they found out that their reputation didn't match up to their intent. There's a lot of tools that are out right now of meditation and mindfulness and all of that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about using hard data to show how other people see you, and then to help you unbundle that, to help you delve into your background to figure out, how did I learn to be that way? Oh yeah, my father treated people that way, or whatever. I mean, and help you disconnect from that and to become the person on the outside that you already are on the inside. And that's what we want to do. So that removes most of the fear from it.
Kelly, any final thoughts before I do my final pitch to get people in the boat? But final thoughts from you, Kelly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Fred. I have not met anybody that didn't have very strong positive intent and who didn't benefit from kind of learning where people might be misunderstanding them or where they might be missing cues from people. So, I just encourage you all to do this. And also I want to just thank you in advance for all of you who are going to participate, because I think a year from now, when we all meet you in New Orleans and reveal the data, it's going to be quite exciting and you'll be at the forefront of this.
So here's my closing pitch. We ask you to join us in this, I think, exciting initiative for the grander good of our industry, the industry of sales, for the grander good of SAMA, our village, and for the grander good of yourself, because as we said, the natural rewards of having a higher character score aren't just in business, but in life. So how do you get there? How do you get on board? Go to the link, take a picture of the photo, go to our solution center. You'll also find return on character there. Choose your dosage, as we said, either the free level or the deeper dive, but join us on board. And we thank SAMA for being the petri dish for this beautiful body of research that we'll be doing over the next year.